love made visible, says Khalil Gibran. This feels true for me, or at least it feels like the way things should be. But that doesn't seem to be how the world really works, does it? Things like love, life, and spirit don't seem to factor into our economic equations, or to have a place in the working world. But what if they could? What if they should? What if they already do and we just don't realize it? I started asking these questions about 15 years ago. I was working in marketing, and I was feeling very disillusioned with the superficial and manipulative techniques that were, and really still are, the industry standard. So I left marketing and started focusing on the inside of organizations, helping employees tap into their sense of purpose and passion and creativity. My colleagues and I talked about engaging the human spirit. And while this felt deeply worthwhile to me, the organizational leaders who were my clients had a strangely familiar, superficial and manipulative attitude about the whole thing. Don't talk to us about the human spirit, they said. This is business. Just tell us what buttons we have to push to get these people to work harder for the same amount of money. Because it's all about money, as everyone knows. Meanwhile, I noticed that the world seems to be falling apart in various ways, but that people couldn't figure out how to break free from the unsustainable patterns humanity was stuck in. That's when I started to think that we must be missing something really important in our ideas about what business is all about, and really what life is all about. Then in 2002, my husband was transferred to Paris for a year, and I was happy to go with him, as you can imagine. But I didn't have the legal status to work there, and I thought, perfect. I'm going to find that missing piece. I'm going to figure this out. My instinct was that it had something to do with life. Because when people in organizations talked about what engaged them, what made them feel passionate, they all talked about feeling more alive. So I read everything I could about biology, in search of the pattern of how thriving living systems work in nature. At the same time, I studied thriving organizations, looking for a common pattern. And what I found is that it truly is the same pattern, whether you're looking at an ant colony, or your body, or an organization, or even an economy. And the good news is that the spirit of life features prominently in that pattern. It turns out that there are 4 defining characteristics of all living systems. First, there are diverse individual parts. So that's the ants in the colony, or the cells in your body, or the people in an organization. Second, there's the level, not of the parts, but of an emergent whole, created from the parts, but with its own characteristics that can't be understood by looking only at the parts. So that's the ant colony, that's you and me, that's the organization. Distinct from the people working within it. Distinct but not separate. So we have parts and we have an emergent whole. The third characteristic is that there are relationships in every living system. That's the network of internal and external connections and interactions. Finally, and here's where it gets interesting, there's what biologists call a self-integrating property. That means that by itself, the living system integrates all those diverse parts into an emergent whole in dynamic relationship internally and externally, in an ongoing process of moment-by-moment self-recreation. So that's what biologists call a self-integrating property. But when I saw that, I thought, wait a minute, that's it. That's life. And for reasons I'll explain in a minute, I would even say that it's the spirit of life. And it sure seems to be hard at work, even in our organizations, especially in our organizations. Now, since discovering this pattern of living systems, I've talked about it and written about it and made it the basis of my work, including the part about the spirit of life. And as you can imagine, I've gotten plenty of advice against using actually either word, spirit or life, in business. Neither one really seems to fit, and both make people generally uncomfortable. I wasn't very surprised to find that people were uncomfortable with the word spirit, but I was pretty shocked to realize that our culture's guiding story basically denies the existence of life. This became clear to me a few years ago when I was working with a coalition of nature museums helping them write a manifesto of what they wanted to do in the world. And they made it clear that we could talk about nature, but not about life. These were biologists, and they were uncomfortable with the concept of life. And so they should be, really. We're brought up to believe that we're all separate from each other and from nature, that the universe, including us and our organizations, operates like a machine, and that we exist primarily to compete and consume. In other words, we're nothing more than isolated metabolism machines. The problem is that the actions that seem logical and inevitable according to this story have proven to be unsustainable, and not much fun either. And so we're beginning to recognize that we need a new version of the story, one with life at the center of its plot. But it's not enough to acknowledge life. We can't forget about spirit. At a basic biological level, the word spirit just seems accurate to me, with its dictionary definition as the intangible breath of life. Even more importantly, the word spirit hints at the underlying integrality of all life. And without this understanding of integrality, of the unity of all life, I'm just not sure that we can reach the level of compassion needed to get to sustainability. I mean, I can only have so much compassion for some fungus in a rainforest, or even for you, if, as long as we believe that we are fundamentally separate and competing metabolism machines. There's also something about the concept of spirit that invites wonder. And personally, I think the world could use a dose of wonder. But even from a hard-nosed business perspective, I find that it makes sense to talk about spirit of life. These days, we see that business success is more and more reliant on human connection and responsiveness and innovation. And those intangible factors are made possible only by engaging whatever it is that makes us living, interconnected, creative beings rather than isolated machines. So if it still seems strange to talk about spirit in business, then I say what must be needed is a redefinition of business in which the integrative, creative spark or spirit of life has its proper place. The heart of the matter then is the need for broad conversation about what makes us alive, creative, and indivisibly connected. And that conversation will inevitably lead us to question everything we believe about the goals and meaning of life, and in particular, of our economic lives. If the 1960s brought us the sexual revolution, in which people intentionally overcame the awkwardness of talking about taboo subjects, maybe now is the time for a spiritual revolution, in which we move past the limiting definitions handed down by past religions and claim our own meanings for the concept of spirit, meanings that are fully grounded in science, at the same time that they invite us to craft every organization as a temple where we can make our best contributions to the whole of life, where work can truly become love made visible. Happily, there is evidence that the revolution has already begun. The emerging disciplines of ecological and environmental economics recognize the economy as a subset of the ecosystem rather than an artificial man-made construct. There is general agreement among global leaders that production output, the traditional measure of national economic success, is an insufficient and even flawed measure of a nation's health. As a result, there have been a flurry of new measures proposed that give a more complete picture of a nation's well-being. A Royal Dutch Shell executive wrote a book more than a decade ago called The Living Company, in which he notes that organizations are living beings engaged in a learning process. Margaret Wheatley wrote a book not long after called Leadership and the New Science, in which she noted the parallels between the ways nature creates order and the ways organizations do. More recently, management expert Peter Senge and several other authors wrote a book called Presence, in which they offer a process for sensing the collective will and wisdom of the emergent level of life that is an organization or a community. Their process involves tapping into what they call source, what I would call the spirit of life. There's a respected and highly effective technique called appreciative inquiry, in which everyone in an organization is invited to share stories about times when they felt fully alive, in search of what is life-giving in the organization. And then there is the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, a vibrant and very active network of 22,000 independent businesses in the US and Canada, Their website says that they celebrate and nurture the natural diversity of the human family, ecosystems, and economies. Diversity increases resilience, propels innovation, cultivates peace, and fosters beauty and joy. And it's not only an organizational network, it's a popular movement, as more and more people realize that they have the power to put their green energy into truly life-enhancing products and projects. So if the new story is beginning to be told, the obvious next question is, how will this change things for each of us in this room? At a general level, I believe that it will open up the possibility of what author Thomas More calls the re-enchantment of everyday life. We've been trained to view life's characteristic patterns as if they are the basic workings of a machine, but even viewed through the skeptical lens of a scientist, those patterns are amazing. Life has manifested in nearly infinitely diverse forms. That's incredible. From that diversity, it creates new emergent forms of life, like you and me, and coral reefs, and companies. Unbelievable. It knits everything together in dynamic, continuously responsive relationship. How beautiful. We are integral parts, inseparable parts of this unfolding creative process as our bodies create themselves out of elements from the living earth. Wow. If more of us really truly got this, if we grasped the full implications of what it means to be alive, animated moment to moment by creative, adaptive, self-directed life, here's what I think we would do differently. We would spend more time being grateful and amazed at the infinite majesty of all life. Every day. I mean, really see the glory of life all around us in all its elegant complexity and be joyfully reverent. We would spend more time in wonder and awe that we're inseparable from that infinite majesty. We would look in the mirror and be reverent and amazed. We would look at everyone around us, even an annoying coworker, even a sworn enemy, and be reverent, grateful, and amazed. Each of us is no less complex, valuable, and miraculous than the rainforest and the coral reef. And though we are distinct, we cannot truly be considered separate. We would take better care of our bodies. They consist of common chemical elements that would cost only a few dollars at a hardware store, and yet they move, they think, they feel, and they are the vessels for our best contribution to the whole of life. We would act more consistently as caring stewards of our larger body, the earth, and all its inhabitants. We would care for every aspect of it, as we would a beloved elderly relative, with gentle respect and accommodation. As we recognize that aliveness is a journey of connection, learning, adaptation, and emergence, we would replace fear with fascination, judgment with compassion. We would recognize how much is beyond our control, but we would also recognize our active and intentional participation in the grand creative dance of life. We would play more, especially at work. Play is a defining characteristic of mammals. It's how we learn best and how we innovate. It is our nature and our joy, and it is a sign of our coherence with all of life. We would spend less time competing and comparing ourselves with others, and more time exploring and honoring our unique gifts and contributions to the whole of life. As we recognize that we exist and evolve only in relationship, we would spend more time learning ways to be in positive relationship with others, starting by understanding our own needs and emotions. We would approach work as a means to honor life, ever seeking ways to make life-enhancing contributions. As Gibran said, work is love made visible, love for self and for the whole of life. We would stand for something larger than ourselves and dedicate ourselves to it relentlessly, refusing to waste our aliveness on anything less than heroic. We would craft our organizations as the fertile ground for our rich collaboration, for our highest contributions, and for the life within us to flourish. We would choose wisely what we buy and where we invest our money and time, making sure that it is truly a life-enhancing investment of our various forms of energy. And finally, we would spend more time in nature, not blasting across a lake mindlessly on a jet ski, but in calm communion with all life. We would practice quieting our minds and listening for what is needed, what is ours to contribute. We would know that the collective wisdom of the whole of life is available to us if we seek it, because we